Every artist loves and enjoys color. Artists delight both in observing the myriad subtle variations of color in nature and in mixing pigments together to reproduce those infinite hues. Painting becomes increasingly delightful as we begin to master the complexities of color mixing. I want to show you how you can greatly simplify the job of color mixing using as your basis the ProMix color system, which I created over 20 years ago and which is used by portrait artists all over the world. In this video, you'll learn how to incorporate these colors into your standard palette and in a simple, direct way achieve any color, particularly the subtle, delicate colors required for portraiture. There are two keys to the mastery of color mixing in painting. The first key is to recognize that all good painting is based on observation, not on rules and not on formulas. Nature herself is the great instructor in color. The second key is the willingness of the artist to do color mixing exercises and to commit the results to memory. We learn as children that yellow and blue make green. Years later, in painting class, we learned that to mix a certain flesh tone, we've got to combine yellow ochre, cadmium red, and white. To be valuable, both discoveries must be committed to memory. You can acquire a working knowledge of color mixing in a trial and error method as you produce actual paintings. But this is the slow way to learn. The rapid, practical way to learn color mixing is to set for yourself a series of exercises, patiently observing what specific colors do as they interact, and committing the results to memory. Once you've mastered color mixing the way I'm about to show you, you'll know what to mix to reproduce what you see. You will have put your use of color on a dependable, reliable, repeatable basis. First, it's important that we understand the three qualities of every color: hue, value, and intensity. The word hue is used to indicate the name of the color: red, yellow, yellow-green, and so on. The word value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color. Here, for example, are three values of the color brown. This is the most important color quality for the artist. The word intensity refers to the strength, saturation, or purity of a color. Both of these are red. One of them is obviously much more intense than the other. As we paint, every brushload of color must be adjusted for hue, for value, and for intensity. Here's the palette I'm recommending for your use in portrait painting. You can see that the colors are arranged in 2 rows across the top with a mixing area below. A diagram showing this arrangement is on page 9 of the ProMix booklet included with the set. The purpose of the system is twofold: time-saving convenience and accuracy. Time-saving convenience is achieved by greatly reducing the amount of mixing required during painting. The 10 ProMix colors are the 10 most used colors in portraiture. When slightly modified by adding touches of the standard colors, a full range of flesh colors are readily attained with a minimum of mixing time. Accuracy comes from the ability to repeat the color combinations with assurance. The top row of colors are the standard colors, the colors that can be purchased in any art material store. I've arranged them for you in several basic groupings. To the left are the cool colors: ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, viridian, and chromium oxide green. Next comes a cool transparent red, alizarin crimson. Then to the right, we've grouped all of the warm colors: consisting of earth colors and the cadmium colors. The earth colors are burnt umber, burnt sienna, Venetian red, and yellow ochre. Finally, the cadmiums are cadmium yellow light, cadmium red light, and cadmium orange. Between the black and the white in the second row, we've placed the 10 ProMix colors. Note that there are, from the right, 3 lights, 2 halftones, 2 darks, and 3 neutrals. The 3 lights are all combinations of the same 3 colors: white, yellow ochre, and cadmium red light. The only difference is that lights 2 and 3 contain also a touch of cerulean blue. Let's mix the light color as if we did not have the ProMix colors. First, I would take a batch of white, then a little bit of yellow ochre, and then just a touch of cadmium red light. Now, depending on my combination, I can get variations of that color. A little bit more white. All right, the mixture I have now is essentially the same, you see, as light 1. To get light 2 and light 3 without the ProMix colors, I would reach over here for a touch of cerulean blue and use the cerulean blue to slightly gray down the mixture. You'll see that that becomes essentially light 2. And then if I reach over and take still more cerulean blue and a little bit more cadmium red, I get the mixture that we call light 3. Next are the 2 halftones. Halftone 1 is a cool halftone, especially helpful as a starting point in painting the receding planes. This color is also mixed by taking white, yellow ochre, cadmium red light, which gives us our basic combination, but I also add viridian and continue adding viridian until the combination becomes almost an olive green. There's the mixture we're after. We add a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow ochre. And we get a beautiful, cool, olivey flesh tone that we can use anywhere in the face where we're painting a grayish receding plane. Halftone 2 is the warm halftone, and it's often used where the light and shadow areas meet in a portrait. If you didn't have the ProMix colors, you could mix this warm, rich color by again combining white, yellow ochre, cadmium red light. There's our basic mixture again. Let me put a little more white in that. This time, however, we're going to reach over for chromium oxide green and cadmium orange. Now we're trying for that particular mixture of those 3 colors. We're pretty close, maybe a touch more chromium oxide green. And there's our halftone 2. The 2 darks, dark 1 and dark 2, are both basically a mixture of burnt sienna, viridian, and cadmium orange. Let me demonstrate that for you. I'll take burnt sienna and viridian, mix the 2 together. The 2 colors almost cancel one another out, producing a rich, dark brown. And then into that mixture, I'm going to put some cadmium orange. I'm working to get that particular shade So a little bit more cadmium orange and maybe a touch more viridian. And I get a beautiful, rich, warm, brownish tone that I can use in my shadows. If I clean the brush and go back for more burnt sienna and more viridian, more burnt sienna, more viridian, and this time a little less cadmium orange, I get the darker version of that mixture called dark 2. And these two colors, dark 2 and dark 1, are the starting point for the dark shadow tones all through the portrait. The three neutrals, which we're calling neutral 3, neutral 5, and neutral 7, for reasons you'll see in just a moment, are combinations of white, ivory black, and with a touch of yellow ochre for warmth. The thing I want you to notice about those three neutral tones is the way they are positioned on a 9-tone value scale. For example, neutral 5, you'll see, is right in the middle of the value scale, equidistant between black and white. Neutral 3, you'll see, is in the light end of the scale, exactly midway between the middle value, neutral 5, and pure white. And neutral 7, in the low end of the scale, is positioned exactly midway between the middle value and pure black. Now I'd like to review with you the 4 steps in every color mixture. I hope that this will give you a clear understanding of exactly what is involved in color mixing. It is not a hit or miss kind of thing. It is not an instinctive kind of thing. When observing a skilled and experienced artist painting from nature, the layman might assume that the artist's color combinations come naturally. In fact, the painter is operating from experience and knowledge. Color mixing is basically a memory exercise based on your foreknowledge of what happens when you combine colors. Color mixing is based on an intelligent analysis of observation. The 4 steps to every color combination are observe, select, analyze, and adjust. Here's what I mean. First, observe. The first step is to observe the subject matter. Intense, sharp observation is the starting point of all good painting. Number 2, select. The artist now looks down at the palette on which his colors are arranged. He selects the one color that comes closest to the color that he intends to achieve through mixing. Third, analyze. The pure tube colors on the palette rarely match precisely what we see in nature. We must therefore analyze the difference between what we've observed and the palette color we've selected. Does the color need adjustment in hue? In other words, made warmer or cooler? Does it need to be adjusted in value, made lighter or darker? Or adjusted in intensity? Or perhaps all of these? The artist then proceeds to make the necessary adjustments. All right, let's put into use what we've just been talking about. I'm going to try to mix several colors for you using those 4 principles. First of all, we're looking at a certain shade of blue. Looking at the standard colors, it's obvious that I should take cerulean blue. And if I brush that out on this card, I can see right away that it's not even close. I have to make 2 changes. One, I need to make it lighter, and I need to make it less intense. I think I can accomplish both by adding a touch of neutral 3. Now that combination is very close. I believe the only additional change I'll make is a touch of viridian. I'm very close, maybe just a touch more neutral gray. And it's pretty close. We might think of adding maybe a touch of yellow, but I'm not sure it needs that. All right, let's try it with a warm color. There's a dull shade of very low intensity red. I'd say we should start, of course, with Venetian red. I brushed some Venetian red out on the card. I can immediately see it's much too dark. It's too intense. I've got to reduce the intensity and lighten the value. Let's try using the neutral again. Mixing a little bit of neutral 3. I lighten the value. I'm close in value. I'm going to add a little bit more neutral 3. I'm close in value, but it needs to be a bit more orangey red. So how about just a touch of cadmium orange into the mixture? And you can see that it's almost where we want to be. Let's try one more. All right, here's a very subdued shade of slightly greenish yellow. Looking up at the standard palette, let's take cadmium yellow light, brush it out on the card. You can see it needs to be darker, needs to be very much less intense. Let's try the darker of the middle value of the 3 neutrals. Neutral 5. Brushing it out here on the palette, now trying it on the card. The value is pretty good. Let's lighten it with a touch of white. Value is pretty good, but it's still much too intense. Needs to be grayed down further. We're going to add some more neutral, more white, and this time a little bit of yellow ochre. And now we've gone just a touch too dark. Got to make the value just a touch lighter. Now we're where we want to be in value. This is warmer, this is cooler. Let's put a touch of cadmium orange into the mixture. And I'd say that was close enough. So you can see what we've been trying to do. In each case, we've been adjusting the hue, adjusting the value, adjusting the intensity. Now for those exercises we talked about. The ProMix exercise chart, included with the ProMix set, shows 78 color combinations, each made by taking one of the 7 ProMix flesh colors and modifying it, in most cases by the addition of just one color. Only in the case of making a color more intense is it necessary to add more than one color. Let's talk about light 1. What you're going to do in just a moment, using the blank ProMix chart that's in your kit, is first you're going to paint light 1 right from the tube into the square at the top. Then there are 6 possibilities that you can do with it. You can make it warmer, you can make it cooler, you can make it lighter, you can make it darker, you can increase the intensity, you can reduce the intensity. And in each case, the chart will tell you the one color that you should add to the original color in order to get the combination. For example, you start by painting pure light 1 into the square at the top. Then here are 3 different suggestions for making light 1 slightly warmer. The first suggestion is alizarin crimson. So you'll wipe off your brush. With a clean brush, you'll take light 1 and a touch of alizarin crimson and mix the color on the palette. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. And you paint it into the square. Wipe your brush off, go back, reload it again with light 1, and this time you select a little touch of cadmium red light. I'm going to show you this in a moment. And the interesting thing, the challenging thing, is to notice the subtle variation. When you change from alizarin crimson to cadmium red light, it's still light 1, but the color shift is from a cool to a warm. Then you wipe the brush off again, and in this case you add just a touch of cadmium yellow light. Again you notice the subtle variation, and so forth down the chart. Let's try actually mixing it and painting it on the chart itself. All right, let's go to work on the blank ProMix chart that comes in the box of colors. We're going to start on the panel headed light 1. First, let's load up our brush with pure light 1 right straight from the tube, and we'll just paint it into the square at the top of the page, not being particularly careful. I think you want to obliterate the printed outline of that box. After it dries, it'll make it easier to see the color. All right. The first panel, as I said, gives you 3 separate suggestions of how you can very slightly alter light 1, making it warmer. The first suggestion is to add a touch of alizarin crimson. I'm going to take a touch of alizarin crimson on my brush, mix it into the light 1. I want it to be still light 1, but slightly different. Do you see that light 1 now takes on a slightly pinkish cast? I want the variation between this panel and that panel to be very slight. I have to look close to see it, because the variations in a portrait are very subtle to the eye. The next suggestion is for adding a bit of cadmium red light. Let's wash off the brush. We'll go back and reload with light 1. And this time we're going to reach up here for just a touch of cadmium red light. And as we mix it, I took a little too much, so let's add light 1 back in. Now, what we're looking for now as we paint it into the square is the subtle variation. It's very subtle between where we added alizarin crimson and where we're now adding cadmium red. It's just a slight. This is more of a pinkish shade. This is more of a warmer yellowish shade. Now the chart is saying what happens when we add cadmium yellow light. Let's wash the brush again. Clean off the brush, go back and reload with light 1, and this time we're going to take just a touch of cadmium yellow light. Now it's exciting to see the slight variation, the subtle variation that occurs. It's still light 1 all right, but now we've moved over into the clearly yellowish tone. Let me reduce the amount of variation just a bit. I've added a little bit of light 1 back into the mixture. The pinkish tones I'm going to find down in the cheek areas of my portrait head. The yellowish tone, I'm apt to find that up in the forehead of a portrait tone. But now our next assignment is to see what happens if we cool down light 1 a little bit. So once again, let's wash our brush off. Let's go up here and load it with light 1, and now the chart says, see what happens when you reach way across the palette for a little touch of cerulean blue. We take just a little bit of cerulean blue on the edge of the brush, and we immediately see what happens. It's subtle, but it's dramatic. The intensity goes way, way down, and the color becomes subdued and slightly grayish. And you will see a million places on your next portrait head where you can use that subtle combination. This is much cooler than the 3 warm tones in the row just above it. All right? The next assignment is simply to take pure light 1 and then lighten it. And there is one obvious way to do that. Let's load the brush with light 1. Let's go over here and dip into the white. We don't want to lose the identity of light 1. We want to achieve a subtle variation that is just 1 shade lighter. This might very well be the highlight that we'll use right in the middle of a forehead in our next portrait, or on the tip of a nose. Now let me hold the brush over light 1. Do you see that it's just a shade lighter? The chart then asks us to to darken light 1. I'm going to go back up, reload my brush, and to achieve the most subtle darkening, all I'm going to do is go to its next door neighbor and take some light 2 and mix it into the light 1. And this will be just a touch darker. Now you see what we're trying to achieve, the most subtle kind of variations. This is just a shade darker than the pure light 1. Now in the next panel is where you need more than one additive. Here they're making suggestions for how you can increase the intensity of light 1. So what we're going to do is load the brush in light 1, and it says add in a little bit of the 2 basic ingredients, namely yellow ochre and cadmium red. Now there you get a really robust version of light 1. It's still light 1, but it is much more intense than it was up there at the top of the column. And if you want to really make it zing out, we're going to reach up for a touch of cadmium orange. Now watch this, without washing the brush. I'm adding cadmium orange. Now there is a beautiful, beautiful tone that you can use in your next portrait, usually in the central third of the face. Now, as you remember in the demonstrations that we did a little bit earlier, I very often had to reduce the intensity. And here it's suggesting take light 1 and reduce the intensity with a touch of neutral 3. I'm going to take just a bit of neutral 3 on the brush. The minute I mix it in, it has very much the same effect as when we earlier added cerulean blue. All right, it's still light 1, but I'm reducing the intensity below what pure light 1 would be. And finally, it gives us one other suggestion for reducing the intensity, and that is try adding a touch of halftone 1. I'm going to load the brush with light 1, brush it out, and a touch of our olive light, halftone 1. Now you have to look sharp to see the difference between this and the one next to it, but it's certainly there. Let me add a little bit more of the halftone 1. It should give me just a little bit of the olive character of halftone 1. All right. What I hope to end up with on this panel is a number of variations that still retain the character of the base color, light 1, making these 6 variations. And then I go ahead and work my way across the chart. All right, let's try the same approach looking for color mixtures in a portrait study. Now, I've selected a very rough, unfinished study so that we can see separate areas of color. Let's try this one right in the center of the face. I'm going to reach down to the palette, take pure light 3 right from the second row of colors. Holding that up to the painting, you can see that this tone and the tone that we're trying to match are very similar. It just needs to be lightened just a touch. I'm going to do that with light 1, and now you can see that this color, light 1 mixed into light 3, gives me the color I'm looking for right there. Moving up here in the area of the eyeglasses, the color gets ruddier. I'm going to go back for light 3 and add a bit of cadmium red, and mixing that right here on the card. I'm close to the area, to the color I'm looking for, but it needs to be grayed down a bit. So I'm going to take a touch of halftone 2, mixing that into the mixture. That gives me the really warm tone I'm looking for right there. Let's try another one. How about the grayish tone right here beneath the lower lip? Starting with the most obvious selection, which would be halftone 2. There it is. Holding that right next to the color I'm trying to mix, you can see that it's too dark. So let's lighten it with a touch of neutral 3. All I've done is to add a little bit of neutral 3. That's moving in the right direction, but I need to cool it down still further. I think I'm going to try a touch of halftone 1. That's that sort of olivey halftone. Now let's try mixing, and there it is. There's the color. There's the color that we're looking for. So we started with halftone 2. We lightened it first with one of the neutrals, and then we added in a touch of halftone 1. Well, let's try one more. How about the shadow color down here just under the collar of his shirt? Looks to me like the color to start with is halftone 1. It's going to be close, just brushing it right out on the card. Much too yellowish, a little bit too light. So let's add a touch of viridian. We'll add a touch of viridian. The hue is better now, but the intensity is too strong. Let's dull it down with a little bit of neutral 7. That will also darken it and reduce the intensity, both at the same time. Pretty close. You can see the point. We're now looking for the more complex colors in the portrait, but we're trying to do it in a simple, direct way of observing what we want to do, selecting a color from our palette, analyze what we need to do, darker or lighter, less intense, more intense, and we make those adjustments. We end up with the colors we're looking for. Let's take another example. Let's try for that warm color right in the middle of the cheek area there. I'm going to reach to the palette for dark 1. We'll brush that out on the card. Hold it up. We see that it needs to be a touch warmer, so let's add a little bit of Venetian red. Venetian red and dark 1. Same color, slightly warmer. I think that's what we need there. Moving up toward the nose, the color becomes a touch grayer. Let's reach for neutral 7 and add just a little touch of white to that. These are very subtle differences. Now here's the same mixture, moving from the warm reddish tone of the cheek to the cooler plane moving toward the nose. And how about that very cool highlight in the middle of the forehead? Let's try neutral 5, and it might be that neutral 5 with the color that is on the brush. We're very close. Let's add just a touch of white to that. A little bit more neutral 5. And there's the cool bluish highlight. If I wanted to make that even more bluish, I would reach across the palette for just a touch of ultramarine blue. And then let's see what that'll do for our combination. I've added just a bit of ultramarine blue, which made it a touch darker than it should be. A little bit of white. Just working a little bit of white into that mixture. And there is pretty much the color we're looking for. All right, well, you get the idea. We're taking the 4 steps in the most direct possible way, observing the subject matter, selecting a color from the palette, analyzing what the difference is, and then making whatever adjustments are necessary to get where we want to go. Now let's apply what we've learned to the painting of a complete portrait head. Because of the time constraint, I'm going to show you a very simplified procedure. I'm going to paint for you a rapid replica of one of my own head studies, painted from life. We're going to try to simplify it as much as we possibly can. We're going to start, as always, with the darks. And that big area of shadow, we're going to start with using dark 1, which we could almost use as is, but we're going to modify it by a touch of chromium oxide green. And we'll mix up quite a batch of that. Dark 1, modified with chromium oxide green. Now, if the model was sitting there live, I wouldn't be able to test my colors this way. That's one of the luxuries of doing a replica of another painting. So let's begin by painting that along the point where the light and shades separate on the side of the face. We'll go right in under the cheekbone, and we're going to paint the entire shadow side of the face using this color. You'll notice as I do it that in some areas it should be a touch darker, in some areas it should be a touch lighter, a touch warmer. We'll make those changes in due course. But the first thing we want to get is this simplified sort of postery statement of the darks. We'll go in under the edge of the hair and onto the ear. And we're using the largest brush we can for the job. It's a number 6 bristle filbert. And in every case, we want to use the largest possible brush for the most simplified statement. All right, I've just dipped into dark 1, and I took a bit of burnt sienna to make it warmer, and I took a bit of burnt umber to make it darker. So this is dark 1 made slightly darker and slightly warmer to go down here for the darkest area of the shadow under the chin. We'll go back and take darker still and warmer still. I'm adding burnt sienna and burnt umber. And we're going to use this to define the forward edge of where the shadow meets the light. It's always darker. It always seems to be darker where the shadow meets the light. It's an optical phenomenon that every painter notices when he begins to mix and match colors. All right. We can take a bit of that same color and just define the edge of the jawline here in the shadow. But let's continue on up the shadow side of the face. As we get above the angle of the cheekbone, all the colors turn lighter. So I'm going to go to halftone 1. I'm going to use halftone 1, and I'm going to try it against my replica, and I can see right away that the value is almost correct. The only difference is it needs to be reduced in intensity, grayed down a bit, and I'm going to try neutral 5 for that. Let's try that. Looks good on the brush. Let's see what happens. As I go to put it on the painting, I see that it's too light. So let's go back again to halftone 1. And instead of the middle value neutral, let's take neutral 7. I think it'll be more favorable to what we're... Let's wipe that off. Be better to take it off than to try to alter it right on the canvas. All right, this time the mixture of halftone 1 and neutral 7 is working pretty good. We'll bring that right over and even into the area of the hair, and we'll blend it back and forth after we paint the hair. Along the edge of the cheekbone down to the top of the shadow, keeping the colors distinct and almost the way a child would do a poster in which he paints the colors simply in the different areas. It gets complex real quick, so we keep it simple as long as we can. Let's take a bigger brush and mix a big batch of color for the shadow side of the hair. I'm going to start with neutral 7, seems like a good place to begin, and we might be able to use neutral 7 just as is here on the darkest part of the hair. No, it needs to be darkened, so maybe a touch of black and a touch of burnt umber. A little bit more black, a little bit more burnt umber, mixed into the neutral 7. Let's try that now for the darkest area along the back receding plane of the hair. Seems to work pretty good. And each time we make a stroke that comes against the contour, the rear contour of the head, we're going to try to make that a dry brush stroke so that we don't have to repaint that later. That'll be our final stroke against the background. A little bit of a dry brush stroke there as we go up against the background. Now, as we come down here behind the ear, looking at our original, we see that it gets very much darker, so I'm going to add lots of burnt umber and black for this darkest tone, more black, for this darkest tone behind the ear. As I begin to put that on and look at my original, I see that it's too warm. So back to the palette and add black and neutral into the mixture. Let's try that. And as we put it on, we're not only thinking of the value and the color, but we need to think of the shape of that ear and the drawing of the ear. Color mixing is important and it's exciting and it's fun, but it doesn't supersede drawing. Drawing remains the most important thing we have to think of. And the shape of that hair as it spills out over the collar. All right, but let's go on up into the hair above the forehead. We're using that same mixture now. Has a little bit of burnt umber in it. And the darkest shadow in the curve of the hair there. And it rapidly becomes lighter. And it has some wonderful warm color. So we'll go down into the neutrals. And we'll add a touch of cadmium orange to get that glowing warm light, whatever is creating that. Let's try this mixture. It's too yellowish, so we're going to add a little bit of Venetian red into the mixture. It has to remain a shadow. I don't want it to look like the sitter has red hair. We're painting a reflected light in the shadow there. And it has cadmium orange in it, making it glow, but I don't want it to distort the actual local color of the hair. All right, and then that brings us down into that big area of the side of the hair, and two things are taking place there. The light strikes here, looking over at the original, the light strikes here, and the edge between the light and shade occurs right there. And this is in shadow. This is in light and this is in shadow. So let's paint the shadow first. I'm going to use neutral 7, lightened up a touch with neutral 5. And we'll come down this way. There's the edge between the light and the shade. Then taking the brush on the side and just treating it like a poster. And when we get over here, we'll just blend it just slightly with our hand. And that is a first statement of the shadows. But let's keep going on the smaller shadows. I'm going to take a smaller brush. I'm thinking of the darks over here in the area of the features, in the eye socket, burnt umber, and alizarin crimson. But not just those two colors together, but mixed into the dark that we've already created here. And this will give us the dark in the eye socket. There's a strong, deep shadow in the recesses of that eye socket. And we're thinking of that now, right now. Instead of the anatomy of the eye, we're just thinking of the shadow there. There's a little touch of that same shadow tucked under the eyebrow over here. It's just tiny. We do it, paint it with the edge of the brush. And then we'll come down and use that same color to define the underplane of the nose. I'm resting my little finger against the canvas here just to steady my hand slightly as I draw that. And even if there were wet paint there, it wouldn't disturb it. I'll come down and draw the shape of that shadow and the very precise rear edge of it. But I can't fill it in with that shadow, that tone. It would be too dark. I've got to lighten it just slightly. And taking that mixture, paint the interior of that shadow tone. All right, we're trying to complete the darks before we go on to anything else. We'll put a little touch of dark in what will eventually be the corner of the mouth. All right, we've we've indicated the dark accent in the corner of the mouth, between the lips, and the little triangle of dark here in the corner of the mouth. Then, continuing down the face, we have to look at the area of dark halftone in the shadow side of the mouth. I'm going to guess halftone 1, darkened down with neutral 7. It's a very grayish tone, grayish for two reasons. One, because of the beard right beneath the surface of the skin, and the other because it's reflecting it's reflecting downward into the room. It's a plane that's turned this way, away from the light. We're trying that tone. Looks pretty good, but it's too light. Let's go back to the palette, take neutral 7, touch of black even. We want the same tone, but darker. Let's try this. Better. And each time we paint one of those planes, we're going to try to represent it as simply and directly and in sort of a poster style as we possibly can. You say, well, why are you doing that? Well, the reason is to try to get the basic statement of the tones and values and colors going in as simple and strong an architectural way as we can. Then later we'll elaborate on them. All right, we've got a huge area of shadow still to deal with. The shadow on the collar and on the shirt. Let's do that now. Looking at the shirt, it's a certain shade of blue. Looking down at our palette, we have to start with cerulean blue. We'll brush that out on the palette. It's nothing like what we're looking at. First thing is to make it very much lighter, which we do with white. And that makes the value right, but it sure doesn't give us the color. What we need is a warmer tone, a little bit more of a yellowish tone. Let's try a touch of our halftone 1 and just see what happens. Now that reduces the intensity. It also moves it over toward the yellow side of the spectrum. I'm going to hold my brush up now in front of the original, see how it compares. It's very similar. Let's try it. Looks similar, and we may have to adjust it. We'll start right there in the light area. And we may not paint the entire area now because we're a little bit out of sequence. We were going to put the dark there, so let's hold that color for just a moment. Take another brush and mix the shadow tone, which we want to paint first. I'm going to go back to the cerulean blue, and I'm going to gray it way down with black. Cerulean blue and black, and then lighten that mixture to the right value. More cerulean blue. The black killed the color altogether. All right, now it's helpful because I have side by side on the palette here the shadow tone and the light tone. They look awfully different. I think I should put just a touch of chromium oxide green into this shadow, just to warm it up a little bit. Just a touch more. All right, let's try, and then let's thin it down with turpentine so that we're putting it on sort of like a wash. Now, as I paint that on the collar, I'm thinking of several things. First of all, how does it relate to the original, and how does the shadow tone relate to the shadow on the face? And as I bring the shadow on the shirt and the shadow on the face side by side, I realize that I have an impossibility there. The dark on the shirt is darker than the shadow on the face. Can't be. So we have to lighten it just slightly. Just slightly. I want it to be a shadow, but I have to maintain the relationship of the two objects, the shirt in the face. All right, a little bit better. Let's try that. And we'll just go down and paint the entire area of shadow, stopping with sort of a dry brush stroke at the bottom. Bring this on up under the ear, and without being real careful about it, we'll leave some dry brush there. There's our shadow tone on the collar. Now, once again, that phenomenon of how when the shadow tone approaches the light, it gets darker and darker. I'm going to wipe my brush off, go back to my mixture, more blue and more black, more black. Now this is the darkest part of that shadow. And remember that this is a cast shadow. This is a shadow that the chin is casting on the shirt, and the cast shadow is always the darkest shadow. All right, right there is where the shadow tone is at its darkest. And we're going to lay aside the large brush loaded with the light color until we actually get to the painting of the lights. Have we completed all of the darks in our portrait? Not quite. Let's take a medium-sized brush and just indicate the dark on the suit jacket. I think we can use pure black. We'll use a touch of that color right here where there is a shadow above the collar. We'll use it to draw the shadow in the corner of the lapel. And then we'll go over here onto the back of the collar and we'll draw just a suggestion of the shadow falling onto the lapel. All right, there is our statement of the darks in this portrait. Now the halftones. Let's begin by mixing a tone for the entire lower third of the face. Let's see just how far we can simplify this. I started into light 3, but I realized it would have been better to use halftone 2. Halftone 2 is the warm halftone. Halftone 1 is the cool one. Let's use the warm halftone. And we're going to add a little touch of cadmium red into it just to make it more rosy. And looking up at our subject matter, I realize maybe a touch of cadmium orange to make it glow. Cadmium orange always makes a mixture glow. Now let's try that. Let's see how usable that is. I shouldn't have added quite so much cadmium orange. Let's go back to the halftone 2. And let's go ahead with that. I can only use that a little way though, because when I go below that point, I'm going to have to gray it down. I can, however, go over here just beyond the nose and use some of that color. I have to pep it up a bit. I'm going to add the cadmium orange back in right where we go against the contour of the face. And then down here on the contour of the chin. But otherwise, in that central third, I'm going to wipe my brush off and gray the mixture down using one of my neutrals. Those neutrals are so valuable. You'll find that you're using more of the neutrals than any other color on your palette. So, halftone 2 grayed down with neutral 5. And let's just go ahead and fill that tone in the entire lower third of the face. Not being real careful about it, going right over our drawing of the mouth, down onto the chin, in the light struck area of the chin. And yes, in the original there are some very warm areas though, but let's come back with those. Painting this almost sort of poster style. And then on the pillar of the face over here in the shadow, ever so slightly blending it into the shadow tone. All right, before we go on to other halftones, let's go back and modify that just a little bit. Down on the lower part of the chin, let's throw in a little bit of warmer color, Venetian red, cadmium red, just to make that chin glow with warm, ruddy color. As we come toward the shadow, we'll throw in a little bit of burnt sienna. And as we come down toward the bottom edge of that chin, burnt sienna. And we'll just blend that a little bit. But up there around the area of the mouth, let's use a grayish, darkish. Now you see, I don't have to mix something brand new every time. I get a lot of stuff going here on the palette, and I can move over into one of the dark tones that I mixed previously and modify my color that way. Needs to be cooler, so we'll take a touch of blue, a little bit more blue, and we're trying to get those cool grayish halftones around the area of the mouth. And as we do that, we're obliterating our drawing of the mouth, but that doesn't matter. And later on we can restore that. Then, taking a warmer color, we get over here into the burnt sienna that's on the palette, and these complicated little forms here where the shadow, where the halftone meets the shadow. But let's not get too involved in the detail there. Let's go on up the face. How about the big halftone on the side of the nose? Let's use halftone 1 to start with. In one area we'll add a little bit of blue right alongside the bridge of the nose. There's halftone 2 with blue added into it to start down the side of the nose. Then as we get toward the base of the nose, the color warms up terrifically, almost with a ruddy glow there, right where the halftone meets the shadow. We'll blend those together. All right, can we use that color anywhere else? The only place I see it is right up there on the forehead. But we're painting halftones. I'm going to wipe my brush off, and the area of halftone in the eye socket. Let's see. Let's start with halftone 2 again. We're going to go over here and take some neutral. And we're going to put a little bit of alizarin crimson. We haven't really used the alizarin crimson so far. A little bit of alizarin crimson into that tone. A little bit more neutral 7. A little bit more alizarin. All right, and that tone we're going to put into the area of the eye socket and under the eye. And over here, under the eye, over there. And that's about all we can do with that. Let's clean the brush off. And the big light-struck area of that cheekbone. Let's start with light 3, and we're going to gray that way down with a neutral. Let's try that. pretty good in value, but it's too yellowish. Let's go back for a little more neutral. And over here, and we'll blend it a little bit as it meets the shadow. And then let's just take a mixture where we can fill in all the remaining area of halftone in the central third of the face. You can see that I have a little bit of cadmium orange in this mixture. We'll use that on the bridge of the nose. And coming down here in what I believe they call the trough of the face, between the nose and the eye socket. And this glowing orangey tone, we can go up here onto the forehead with it. No, it's too brilliant. Let's gray it down. Let's gray it down. Into the shadow. Alongside the shadow, blend it just a little bit down into the eye socket. And now we're going to clean the brush off, and we want a big area of light struck tone for that forehead. And what shall it be? I'm going to just use a combination of some of the stuff that's here on the palette. It's going to work because, all right, there it is. Has cadmium orange in it, has light 3 in it. And we'll sweep across the forehead and then paint the forward edge of that forehead. Where we come down into the brow ridge area, two things happen. First, it lightens up. It lightens up where the light strikes, where the brow ridge comes forward. And that same color, we can go up here for the lightest area up here, strong highlight really, in the center of the forehead. Well, you got to use a clean finger if you're going to try to blend with your finger. Either a clean brush or a clean finger. All right, but then down below the brow ridge, things gray down a little bit and get darker. And just a single stroke there. And then over here on this, the far cheekbone, for some interesting and unusual reason, it's grayish and almost has a slightly yellowish light on it. Looks a little bit like that in the original. And just to make it harmonious, maybe we'll put a touch of that on this side as well. All right, we've almost painted all of the halftones. Let's quickly do the halftones in the hair. I think we can pretty much stay to the neutrals. Let's see how this looks. A little bit too light. Let's darken it. We'll go over to the darker neutral. And we'll try to blend that in just a little bit. Well, the mixture I have there is a little bit warmer than it should be. Let me just cool it down a bit. Put in a little bit of blue. I think that's a more faithful rendition of that tone. We'll just blend it just a bit. And we'll try to improve that later on. And then how about up on the top of the hair? Let's try to mix a little touch of yellow ochre into our neutral. There's a warm blonde highlight up there. Needs to be more grayish. That comes down toward the front of the hair and gets very darker and grayer. Let's see, about like that. And then Let's see if we can duplicate that big stroke that curves around there. We'll save the highlights in the hair until later. Now that's pretty much the halftones except for the one on the shirt. And here's the brush mixture that we mixed up a half an hour ago, and let's spread that on. Using a horizontal stroke and up here, and just blend that together a little bit. All right, we've done our darks, we've done our halftones. Now let's spend just a moment concentrating just on the lightest lights. For example, on that cheekbone, this cheekbone right here where the light strikes, I'm going to take maybe pure light 3, add a touch of cadmium orange to it, and try to load the brush up with plenty of paint, and we'll just put that stroke on sort of like that, and with a little bit of that same color going this way, that way, and then we'll blend it just a little bit. All right. Up on the forehead, let's take a grayish, yellowish color and be a little more careful about the brow ridge there. We already have the strong highlight up on the upper part of the face, upper part of the forehead. Now let's come down just to the corner of the nose and pick up a orange and red combination for our strong light right along the edge of the shadow here. Let's see. About like that, and let's just feather the edge of that just a bit. Where that comes down to the center of the lips, we'll take just the corner of the brush and put a little light there. And I think if we darken it just slightly, we can go down and put a light on the top of the chin. Just like that. We could soften the bottom edge of that a little bit. And if we gray that just a bit, gray that down just a touch, maybe we can use that along this form on the chin. And lights, we're doing lights, going back up in value, a little light on the highest part of that upper lip just beyond the nose. And while we have that on the brush, maybe a touch of that on the top plane of the nose. Perhaps a touch of that same color on the eyelid there. And maybe that is our light tones. So let's spend just a moment now on restating. If this were a prolonged study, we would spend quite a lot of time on restating. This is a very abbreviated, so let's just do the restating that affects our drawing. Going back into the shadow tones, let me clean up the drawing of this chin just a little bit. Same mixture as before, burnt umber and alizarin crimson. Get the edge of that chin good and strong. And where it starts up the side of the face, let's get the shadow underneath the nose a little bit stronger. Let's go up here in the eye socket and slightly darker there, and all the way up to the top of the forehead, slightly darker there. And we can take, if we darken it just a touch, we can go over here on the back of the head and just make that dark a little bit stronger. And maybe down here in the darkest point at the base of the hair. Restating the darks. How about restating the halftones? Maybe we'll just soften a few edges. We'll soften an edge right here and there, and maybe we'll just soften an edge there. But our final step, and let's soften the edge of that small form on the chin. Our final step is the features. I'm going to take a small flat sable, and let's look at the eyes first. I'm going to use my maul stick. I'm going to go over here and take a mixture for the iris. I'm going to use ivory black, a little bit of one of my neutrals. There's my iris color. I'm going to paint that right into the area of the iris on both sides. All right, I'm going to wipe a little of the paint off my brush and darken the mixture with black, and just very quickly darken the upper third of those irises. They're slightly in shadow. I'm going to clean my brush off and take pure ivory black for the painting of the pupils. Just a little touch of pure ivory black. And while I have the black on the brush, go back into the iris mixture and almost pure black up here at the very top of the iris. All right, let's just take a little bit of burnt umber on the brush, pure burnt umber, and state the dark of that upper eyelid and the shadow that it casts on the eye. Remember, this is a very simplified study. There's no real detail here. Just an impressionist study. Study those rapid sketches of Sargent sometime and see the shorthand that he uses for eyes and noses and mouths. All right, let's leave the eye for a moment and work our way down. On the nose, let's take pure burnt umber and put in the dark of the nostril. And then maybe just a touch of slightly darker color on the edge of that shadow and where it starts down the upper lip. And just define the drawing of the nostril a bit more. Okay, we'll clean the brush off, take burnt sienna, and we're going to go down and once again restate first the dark accent at the corner of the mouth there, the dark accent over here, and we need to make that darker, so burnt umber and burnt sienna. We'll drop down in position just a bit. And then where the lips meet, a nice strong accent. All right, let's wipe the brush off, clean the brush off, and we'll take cadmium red, gray it down. We'll try this for the tone of the upper lip. It's a strong cadmium red. Right in the center. And then where it slips over into the shadow tone, we'll darken it and gray it for just a single stroke running that way. On the lower lip, we need a warm, light tone. I'm going to take maybe just pure light 3. And where the light strikes that upper lip, and where the light breaks in a downward direction there, and also there. And then under that lower lip, we need some grayish tones. This is burnt umber, grayed down. And let's go darker there, and a little more definite there, and into the corner of the mouth. And we need to make that accent in the corner of the mouth a little bit more precise. Okay, and then let's see, up around the area of the eye, I'm going to mix a gray tone for this strong form right there, and coming down into that light. And we need to lighten that plane beneath the eye just a bit. We're really doing our finishing touches now. Slightly lighter there. Slightly lighter there. Let's put the corresponding form beneath the eye there. Clean the brush off, and we need to do our maybe the most important single stroke in the entire picture. The catch light on the nose, I'm going to use pure light 1. And we'll study just where that stroke comes, about there. And there's usually a secondary highlight up there on the bridge of the nose. And we can probably put a highlight right in the middle of that lower lip, right there. If we have one last form on the face that needs a little attention, the sort of expression form that goes right next to the corner of the mouth. That's a little stronger than it should be. We'll soften that just a little bit. And when you are doing a rapid study like this, it's always hard to know when to quit, but you quit when you feel that you've made a believable statement of the essential character of the face.